A young man dies in a car accident and is reborn in a magical new world. The old yet wise Merlin finds the boy, names him Shin, raises him from infancy, and teaches him combat and powerful magic along the way. 15 years later, Shin is ready to travel the globe on his own, but Merlin forgot to teach him something major: common sense. We see a young man who works full-time in an office in Japan. He's a lonely young man who thinks his life isn't special, and he stays alone in his office until late because he has no one waiting for him at home. One day, as he leaves the office late at night, the young man's life ends in a car accident. Thus, he reincarnates into a world of magic, swords, and demons, where he is reborn as an unfortunate baby whose family was murdered by a demon. He is rescued by an old man who raises him as his grandson and names him Shin Wolford. After 8 years living in the forest with his grandfather, Shin is already an exceptional child who dedicates himself to hunting and learning magic. Despite living a normal and happy life, Shin still retains memories of his past life, although he doesn't remember how he died. After a day of hunting, Shin returns to his grandfather, Merlin Wolford, who praises him for using wind magic well while hunting. He's also surprised to see how well Shin masters fire magic without needing any enchantments. Shortly after, Shin is delighted to see his grandmother, Melita Bowen, a friend of his grandfather who visits frequently. She arrives with Michael Collin, who is responsible for training Shin rigorously in combat. Seeing Shin's joy, Merlin explains that he shouldn't only learn his magic, but should also study magical equipment and fencing. 2 years later, Merlin tells Shin that he's now 10 years old and it's time for him to experience demon hunting. So they venture into the forest, and along the way, Merlin explains that the world is imbued with magical power, and therefore all living creatures can harness its benefits. However, if they fail to control it, those creatures become violent and end up attacking indiscriminately, turning into demons. Merlin says with a serious look that people are no exception, and recounts how long ago someone turned into a demon and nearly destroyed an entire nation. Shin tells him that he still saved them, and that even his grandfather is now considered a hero in that land. Merlin laughs it off, saying it's time to start, so they need to find a demon. He explains that by slightly extending magical power around him, he will be able to sense if it comes into contact with another magical power. And since all living creatures have magical power, he will immediately know what it is and where it is. Merlin says that's called search magic, and it's difficult to do unless he controls his magic to a certain extent. But he's surprised once again when Shin successfully activates his search magic on the first try, extending it throughout the entire forest. Shin is excited to feel the magic of all the creatures in the forest, including his grandmother Melita's at home. But he's alerted to a sinister feeling, which his grandfather identifies as the magical power of a demon. They both venture into the forest and manage to find the demon, which turns out to be a giant and hostile brown bear. Merlin is alarmed to see Shin rushing towards the bear without thinking and tries to stop him. However, before he can do anything, Shin quickly ends the demon's life by cutting off its head. In the midst of shock, Merlin observes the bear's corpse, which suddenly reminds him of the past. Snapping out of his trance, he tells Shin he did a good job dealing with the demon, and shortly after, they head back home. There, Merlin tells everything to Melita and Michael, who are amazed by Shin's impressive abilities at such a young age. Melita says he even seems like a child from another world, but Merlin tells her that no matter who he is, he sees him as his grandson, so he can't help but adore him and see him as his grandson too. Surprised, Melita teases him and says she can't believe she's hearing that from someone who was once called the Lord of Destruction. Still, she says she also adores that child, and despite only visiting occasionally, she still sees him as a grandson. Days later, Merlin talks to Shin, confesses that he's not his real grandfather, and apologizes for not saying it earlier. However, Shin confesses he already knew that. Still, Merlin explains that he found him among the rubble when he was a baby, after finding his parents murdered by a demon. He also says that demon Shin killed days ago probably was responsible for his parents' murder. Shin says he had also thought that, and maybe that way he could avenge his parents. Then he asks who his parents were and where they were from, but Merlin tells him that due to his condition he couldn't recognize them, and he never found anything that told him who they were. Shin resigns himself to this, and Merlin tells him he's taking everything too calmly. Shin replies that it's because even if they were his parents, he really can't remember them, besides the fact that he has him as a grandfather. And thanks to him, his grandmother Melita, and Michael, he never really felt alone. Shin thanks Merlin for picking him up and tells him he's very happy to have been adopted by him. Without saying anything, Merlin simply cries uncontrollably, completely moved by his grandson's words. 5 years pass, and Shin's 15th birthday is celebrated at Merlin's house, where Disseum von Erlscheid attends, who sees Shin as a nephew and toasts to him reaching adulthood. Disseum asks Shin what he plans to do in the future, and Shin tells him he's never really left the forest, so he'd like to see the nearby village. Disseum then asks what he plans to do after that, but this only confuses Shin. Siegfried Marquez tells him there must be something else he wants to do, like becoming a magic equipment distributor by enchanting. And Christina Hayden tells him that since he's learned to fight with Michael, he could join the Royal Order or become a demon hunter. Shin asks what that is, so the merchant Tom Hogg explains that there's something called the Demon Hunter Society. People will collect rewards when they defeat a demon, depending on its category. Shin thinks about it for a moment and says that as an adult, he'll have to earn money, but then he'll have to learn how to use it. Tom asks if he's never been shopping, and when Shin says no, the whole room is shocked. Everyone's gaze turns to Merlin, and he says he forgot to teach him common practices. Shin says he hadn't thought about it, but until now he's only learned magic and he hasn't really learned anything else. After such a statement, everyone heads to the desert, which Shin uses as a magical training ground. Everyone is surprised when they arrive through a door that Shin summoned, and Melita explains that it's one of Shin's original spells. Shortly after, Merlin tells Shin to demonstrate a spell as if it were a final exam. So Shin cast a fire spell powerful enough to create a huge explosion in the distance, forming a massive crater in an extended area of the desert. When Shin looks back at the others, he's confused to see them all completely terrified. Coming out of his shock, Melita gets angry and scolds Merlin for not teaching his grandson prudence. Back at the house, everyone discusses how risky it would be to send Shin into the world, as he could cause conflicts. Disium tells Merlin that Shin's abilities are enough to disrupt the balance of power, and if he goes out into society that way, it'll be a disaster, especially since the Empire is actively trying to expand its military forces. Therefore, Disium proposes the idea of enrolling Shin in the Magic Academy, promising to welcome him to his country without exploiting his abilities for military use. Seeing that Shin doesn't understand what he's talking about, Disium explains that in an academy, he'll meet people his age and learn how out of scale he is compared to others. Upon hearing the idea, Shin agrees, saying he'd like to give it a try, so Disium says he'll take care of the arrangements with the school. He also explains that classes are set according to entrance exams, so Shin will take one to get in. Disium clarifies that the Magic Academy of his nation isn't under the influence of the nobility and is entirely based on merit, so he can't show any favoritism. Listening to his uncle talk about his nation, Shin is confused and asks who he is. His uncle realizes he never mentioned it, so he stands up and introduces himself as Disium von Earlscheid, the king of the Earlscheid Kingdom. Shin is shocked to learn that his uncle has been a king all along, so he also asks about Chris and Sieg, whom he considers brothers. Christina clears his doubts and says she belongs to the Royal Guard Order, and she's there escorting His Majesty. And Siegfried confesses that he's a mage from the Court Magic Division, and he's also there as an escort. Even more surprised, Shin also asks about Michael, and he tells him that despite being retired, he was once the commander of the Knights of the Order. After recovering from the shock of the sudden turn of events, Shin asks his uncle why a king would call his grandfather. Disium tells him about the incident that happened in his own country, when the first Demonoid, a person who turned into a demon, appeared in his kingdom. An entire city was wiped off the map, so in the crisis, the nation decided to recruit its students. And back then, he was still the crown prince attending the Magic Academy, so he joined the subjugation squad. However, just as the Demonoid was about to take his life, Merlin and Melita saved his life. And they defeated the Demonoid, earning his complete admiration and gratitude and becoming the heroes who saved them from the national crisis. Therefore, since then, they have shared a friendship that went beyond their positions. Seeing that Shin still treats him as always despite knowing he's a king, Disium asks him never to change, as he's the only one he can have a relaxed conversation with. Shin brings up the topic again and says he never thought his grandparents formed their own team. But Christina tells him they were once husband and wife, which surprises and confuses Shin a lot. After a few days, Shin and his grandfather moved to their house in the capital, along with Melita, who agreed to stay with them only because Shin asked her to. Upon arriving in the capital, the inhabitants quickly recognized them as Merlin the Wise and Melita the Guru, causing a great commotion due to the pair of celebrities. Finally, they arrive at a large mansion filled with servants, where they will live while Shin attends the academy. While his grandparents take care of things at home, Shin explores the capital, making purchases for the first time and walking around the area. After a while of walking, he arrives at a deserted alley where two girls are being harassed by three demon hunters who abuse their power. Seeing the scene, Shin thinks about how cliché it is and tries to stop the guys by talking. Of course, this only provokes them, and they attack Shin, who is surprised at how slow the men's attacks are and easily defeats them in no time. He makes sure the girls are okay, and shortly after, the three of them head to a cafe, where the girls introduce themselves as Maria von Messina and Cicely von Claude, a shy girl whom the protagonist found very cute at first sight. After Shin also introduces himself. Without mentioning his last name, Maria says they could have handled the situation if they could use magic. Upon hearing this, Shin asks if they are students at the academy, and they respond that they will be if they pass the exam next month. Shin says he will also take that exam, so Maria is surprised, saying she didn't think he would want to be a wizard with such combat skills. Cicely says they even thought he was a student at the night training school after seeing him fight before. Still, Shin tells them that he will see them at the exam. And if all three of them pass, they will study together, so he encourages them to do their best. After a while of chatting, Shin says he just arrived in the capital, so Maria tells him that the Wise and the Guru recently returned to the capital. Shin responds somewhat evasively, surprising Maria, who explains that they are national heroes and even legends. She also says she heard that their grandson will take the test for the Magic Academy, fantasizing about what he will be like. Listening to Maria talk nonstop, Shin decides to leave and bids farewell in a friendly manner, paying the cafe bill. The day of the exam arrives, and despite seeing many people, Shin decides to do his best to see Cicely again. However, in no time he is bothered by Kurt von Rietsberg, who yells at him to get out of the way. Not seeing any reaction from Shin, Kurt tries to move him himself, but as soon as he places his hand on his shoulder, the students around them are surprised by the way Shin refers to the king. August simply laughs, saying it's the first time someone has addressed him so casually. When Shin tells him it's because they're practically cousins, August laughs again, clearly happy, and tells Shin to do his best in the exam. Meanwhile, Maria and Cicely watch from a distance, somewhat confused to see Shin treating the prince so casually, but they are more concerned about Kurt's problematic presence at the academy. After the written exams, Shin heads with a group to a room for the practical exam, where students must cast their best spells at wooden targets. Shin gets excited as he has never seen someone his age use magic before. However, he is shocked when the first boy recites his spell aloud, making exaggerated movements just to cast a poor fire spell that didn't even affect the target. Shin can't help but think how embarrassing that was, even though the boy is very proud of his spell. After seeing the other pitiful presentations where students even danced for recited nonsensical things, it's Shin's turn. Despite being horrified by the terrible performances, he composes himself to perform his spell. The girl supervising them says she heard about him from the king and tells Shin to keep his power under control and not destroy the room. Shin then summons a flame, surprising the other students by not reciting an incantation aloud. He then casts a fireball that generates an explosion, strong enough to startle the group. The girl tells him he had to keep his power under control, but Shin explains that he restrained himself as much as he could, so they let him pass. Later on, the day when the exam scores are published arrives, and of course, Shin and August passed with the highest scores. When they hand Shin the uniform enchanted with defensive magic, they clarify that he can't re-enchant it on his own. Not very satisfied with this, Shin asks if he can have his grandmother re-enchant it, and knowing that Shin's grandmother is the famous guru, they give him the permission he needs. They also tell him that since he had the highest score in the exam, he'll have to give a speech for the new students at the entrance ceremony. When he arrives home, Shin rewrites the enchantments on his uniform himself, as it was only enchanted with 3 protection spells. So he adds anti-embedding magic, self-healing, absolute magical defense, and complete absorption of physical impact. When he finishes enchanting his new uniform, he shouts excitedly, alerting his grandmother, who asks why he's shouting in the middle of the night, but is very surprised to see what he did to the uniform. On the day of the entrance ceremony, Melita warns Shin not to tell anyone about his uniform. But she doesn't manage to say much more, as when a group of students sees Merlin and Melita, they quickly rush towards them. During the entrance ceremony, Shin is called to give his speech and is introduced as Shin Wolford, the student who got the highest score. Cicely and Maria are very surprised to hear his last name, and August confirms that he is the hero's grandson, leaving them even more amazed. Shin gives his speech properly, even though Kurt never stopped looking at him with hatred. Shortly after his first class, Maria calls Shin and takes him to Cicely, seeking help. They tell him that there is a man who is harassing Cicely, which upsets Shin a lot. Maria explains that despite Cicely continuing to reject him, he keeps taking advantage of his family's power to threaten her. He then realizes that the harasser is Kurt, who yells at Cicely for talking to Shin. Kurt tries to push Cicely away, but Shin protects her, which angers Kurt, and he exclaims that she is his fiancée, so she has to stay away. Shin looks at Cicely, but she is too scared to speak. Shin lets her know that whatever happens, he will protect her. So Cicely gathers courage and tells Kurt that she already rejected his engagement, so he can't go around saying they are engaged. Kurt then threatens her again, saying he can ruin her family if she talks to her father. But August appears again, reminding him of what he said the other day and saying it's inexcusable to use his father to apply pressure. Clearly scared and threatened by the prince's authority, Kurt leaves the place. Shin thanks August for his intervention, as he almost lost his temper, and suggests that everyone goes to his house, as they still need to be careful of Kurt. Excited to visit the sage and guru's house, everyone goes to Shin's house, including Julius von Littenheim and Thor von Flegel, August's escorts. After Shin introduces his classmates to his grandparents and the king, he explains the situation and says that due to the circumstances, he would like to overwrite the enchantment on Cicely's uniform. Melita explains to Cicely that this enchantment is a particularly radical matter, and that Shin is very serious about keeping her safe. So she asks her if she thinks she's worthy of accepting it. Although Shin tells her she's exaggerating, Melita silences him, saying he's not even aware of what he's wearing. Seeing Shin's confusion, Melita explains that his uniform has become a national treasure-grade protection equipment, surprising everyone in the room. After making that clear, Melita asks Cicely again if she's ready, and if she thinks she's worthy of receiving something like that. But Cicely starts crying, saying she's not worthy of accepting something like that and that she's only taken advantage of Shin's kindness despite not knowing him well. Cicely apologizes and says she'll take care of her issue in some other way, also apologizing to Melita, ready to leave the room. However, the guru stops her, saying with a smile that if she had accepted it without saying anything, she would have kicked her out of her house. But because she told the truth and even gave up the opportunity to get a national treasure-grade protection equipment, she proved herself worthy of accepting Shin's help. Melita hugs Cicely, apologizing for testing her and saying she just had to be absolutely sure of her. After enchanting Cicely's uniform, everyone is surprised by how easily Shin rewrote the enchantment. Dicium then says that if something like that gets out into the world, there will be many problems, so they can't tell anyone else about it. Shin asks if it's really that serious, so Dicium explains that if the military finds out, there could be those who would want to declare war. Shin is surprised, saying that Dicium is right and that he hadn't considered that possibility. Melita is pleased and says it's the first time Shin has regretted something, as he is never aware of the weight of his actions. Still, at the king's request, Shin enchants his classmates' uniforms as well, except for Maria's, who prefers not to have state secrets in her uniform. Cicely thanks Shin for the help, and Shin tells her he will accompany her to the academy every day. Although Cicely worries it might be too much trouble, Shin assures her it will be easy if they use a portal. Seeing their classmates' confusion, Shin opens a portal that takes them to his house in the forest. Completely surprised, they ask if it's teleportation magic, but Shin says it's more like connecting two different places. He also explains that he can only open a portal in places he's been before. No one understands what he's talking about, and they just say he's really far ahead of the rest in terms of abilities. Still, Shin says it's not so bad, and he really doesn't understand what they're talking about, which just confuses the others even more. Later, on the first day of classes, a teacher gives them a tour of the academy and explains the different study groups that exist. However, Shin doesn't seem interested in any group really, so August suggests the idea of creating their own study group. And although Shin doesn't like the idea, all the students, including their teacher, convince him to create a Supreme Magic study group dedicated to mastering all kinds of magic. Meanwhile, in the Royal Council, King Dicium listens to reports that say the appearance of demons is constantly increasing without stopping. Dominic Gaster explains that it has been increasing extremely slowly, as if they wanted to avoid being noticed. And he confesses that he has the impression that this increase is artificially induced. Upon hearing this, Dicium orders the Demon Hunter Society to be prepared to investigate this thoroughly. Shortly thereafter, in the state of Reetzburg, Kurt's father reprimands him after receiving a communication from His Majesty. However, Kurt says they are special, so he doesn't believe it's right for them to be treated at the same level as commoners. His father asks him what he's talking about, but Kurt becomes hysterical, exclaiming that he is the chosen one and many more nonsensical things that only manage to scare his father. Seeing him go crazy to the point of considering harming those who defy him, his father hits him, saying he can't overlook such violent statements. So he orders Kurt to be locked in his room while he thinks very well about his punishment. The news reaches the academy the next day, and Shin asks why Kurt has that attitude. Julius and Thor say they don't understand either, as they went to the same high school as him, but his behavior was never like that. Thor explains that he started acting differently after starting to go to Professor Oliver Strom's laboratory, and he tells that in his third year of high school, Strom was transferred as a magic teacher, claiming to be exiled from the Empire. August says he invited any student with decent magic to his lab, something they found very suspicious. Back in Reetzburg, Kurt's mother receives Professor Strom at her house and asks him to help as she doesn't know what's wrong with her son. However, when Strom sees Kurt, he tells him to teach the annoyance that got in his way a lesson while casting a spell that turns Kurt's eyes red. Later on, Shin detects the presence of a demon in the academy, but when he sees where it's coming from, he sees Kurt, completely out of control. Kurt launches a big attack directly towards Cicely, so Shin blocks it with a magical shield. While blocking the attack, Shin yells at August and Cicely to activate the magic in their uniforms. Cicely worries seeing Shin's hands and part of his face severely burned, but he tells her he's okay, as his uniform's self-healing works well. In no time, the burns disappear, and seeing Kurt demonized, Shin asks August to take the others away from there. August tells him he has to flee too, but Shin says they can't let a Demonoid go crazy in the capital. When the others finally leave, Shin starts fighting Kurt, and seeing him running straight towards him, he casts a spell to stop him a bit. However, he's surprised when he sees that spell actually hurt him. Kurt gets up from the ground and insults him, which further confuses Shin, as it seems strange to him that a Demonoid can talk, because according to his grandfather, Demonoids lose their reason completely. Seeing that another of his attacks hurts him, Shin realizes he hasn't fully turned, so he thinks of a way to return him to normal. But shortly after, Kurt begins to concentrate a large amount of magical power to create an explosion that could destroy the entire academy. Shin tries to stop him with normal attacks, but seeing that he can't harm him and running out of time, he has no choice but to summon a sword that he uses to cut off his head with a single strike. Seeing Kurt's body, Shin can't help but think he's the first person he's killed, disturbed, not knowing what's going on. Shortly after, his classmates return to his side after having seen everything, somewhat surprised that Shin could defeat a demonoid. August tells him that things will get complicated for Shin, as this is the second demonoid in history. What is supposed to be a big problem that would disturb the entire kingdom, however, Shin resolved it very easily. A group of soldiers arrives at the scene asking August where the demonoid they reported is. When August shows them the place where the demonoid's body lies, the soldiers are surprised, thinking that August defeated the demonoid. However, August clarifies that it wasn't him and raises his voice to declare that Shin Wolford, the grandson of Merlin the Wise, was the one who defeated the demonoid. After a moment of shock, the soldiers start cheering his name, calling him their new hero. Shortly after, Shrum observes the academy, saying that the experiment was a complete success. Meanwhile, Shin talks to his classmates about Kurt, as it is very strange that he suddenly turned into a demonoid. This is because he would need an enormous amount of magical power to lose control, and he had just entered the academy. His classmates acknowledge that this is true, so Shin asks if it's possible that it was artificially induced, being part of some kind of human experiment. The idea shocks his classmates, but they definitely consider it possible. When Shin returns home, he finds his uncle Dis talking to his grandparents. There they reveal to him that for defeating the demonoid, he has been awarded the First Order Merit by King Earlshide. Merlin reminds Dicium that he wasn't supposed to use Shin for political purposes, but Dicium explains that the news that Shin defeated the second demonoid in history has already reached almost the entire population, and since he achieved the same feat as Merlin and Melita, they cannot avoid giving him recognition. Merlin decides to trust that Dicium will not take advantage of Shin, clarifying that if he breaks his word, they will leave the kingdom. The next day, Shin's popularity is much more noticeable in public, as the news inevitably spread far. Of course, in the academy, he is even more popular, so many students want to join Shin's study group. After the entrance exams, 2 students were admitted to Shin's study group. A boy named Mark Bean, whose family runs a famous forge called Beamworks, and Olivia Stone, a girl who has known Mark since childhood and whose family owns a well-known restaurant. Shin asks Mark about his blacksmithing skills, as he would like to have a new weapon. But Mark says it would be crazy to create something that compares to Shin's sword, as with it, he was able to kill a demonoid. However, Shin clarifies that he used a normal sword when he did that, explaining that he simply enchanted it with magic, causing the blade to vibrate at ultrasonic speed, thus cutting most objects without using force. Mark says that then it is possible, so he will have to consult with Shin while making the weapon. Elsewhere, 2 investigators from the security office are sent to investigate Strom for Kurt's case. So they both meet with him under the guise of looking for specialists to examine what happened to Kurt's demonized body. Telling Strom that they need him as he is a high-level mage, he agrees without a problem, so he goes with them. However, as soon as they arrive at the scene, Strom is surrounded by soldiers, and they reveal that they have evidence indicating that he is responsible for the incident. Feeling cornered, Strom laughs and confesses that he was simply conducting an experiment. After clarifying that he has already finished all his experiments in the capital, Strom says it's time for him to leave the place, becoming defensive. So the investigator orders them to catch him and not let him escape. While all this is happening, Shin and his classmates walk down the street on their way to Mark's forge to try out some ideas for a weapon. But their walk is interrupted by the sound of a loud explosion. Approaching, they manage to see a destroyed wall, revealing a bunch of soldiers surrounding Strom. The injured investigator on the ground tells August to flee, as Strom is the culprit behind the demonoid incident. But when Shin hears this, he gets angry and rushes towards Strom to fight, managing to confront him for a good while. Strom admits that Shin is someone dangerous, so using magic, he flies up in the air, getting away from him. Shin is surprised to see this, as he had never seen floating magic before. Still, with a big jump, he manages to reach Strom, hitting him with his sword, breaking the mask he always wears. This angers Strom a lot, who casts a spell strong enough to push Shin away. Looking at Strom now without his mask, Shin is surprised when he sees that he has red eyes, indicating that he is a demonoid with his sanity intact. Shin casts spells as a distraction while concentrating large-scale magical power outside the place behind Strom. So in no time, he manages to catch him off guard, launching a great attack that blinds everyone in the room. There is no trace of Strom, so the others examine the damage in the place. Shin seems unsure, and despite using his magical search, he can't detect any trace of Strom's presence. When asked how he performed that big attack, Shin explains that he used the energy of the sun to concentrate heat. Still, as he observes the destroyed place, he really doubts if his attack caused such a big explosion. Meanwhile, Strom crawls away in another distant place, saying that he was lucky to release explosive magic quickly and flee the area. Otherwise, he would have been at risk of being annihilated if he received that attack. Now more certain that Shin is someone dangerous, Strom says he will have to take measures to ensure that he cannot interfere with him. Because his plans were interrupted by the attack, the group of students decides to go to the forge the next day. As they walk, Shin confesses to August that Strom is probably still alive. He explains that he tried to do the same spell he used against him in the desert, but when trying it for the second time, there was no explosion, so it was probably a trick. Upon hearing such a statement, August tells him that when they arrive at the blacksmith, he should order what he needs and says that the royal family will pay for it. This is because Shin is the only one who can fight on equal terms against Shutram, so they must ensure that he has the necessary equipment. After going to the blacksmith and ordering what he needs, Shin decides to buy an accessory for Cicely to enchant it and give her protection. After a while, the day of the final awards ceremony finally arrives, so Shin attends the royal castle of Earlshide, where he is awarded the First Order merit for his exemplary actions in the kingdom. After receiving his medal, Dicium announces that Shin Wolford is the grandson of his friend Merlin the Wise. It informs everyone about the promise he made not to exploit Shin for political or military purposes, as otherwise the heroic family will leave that land. Therefore, Dicium exclaims that under no circumstances should they forget that, concluding the ceremony. The next day, Shin decides to use a portal to get to the academy as a crowd was waiting for him outside his house, preventing him from leaving. After meeting with his study group, he explains that due to the strange events that have been happening, he plans to improve his magical skills in every aspect. After class, Shin sees another crowd waiting outside the academy, so he decides to go home through another portal. His study group accompanies him, so they talk with Shin's grandparents about his progress. Merlin says that although he was the first to teach Shin to use magic, his grandson has his own way of visualizing things. He explains that Shin doesn't visualize the outcome of magic, but the process, questioning why things happen and seeking logic. Therefore, he doesn't just think about the result, but grasps the mechanisms that lead to it. This allows him to imagine new visualizations that have never been done before, resulting in more powerful magic. Merlin opens a magical portal as an example, surprising everyone, including Shin, since his grandfather couldn't understand that spell before. Merlin then says that thanks to the explanation Shin gave him once, he was able to figure it out and managed to learn how to summon a portal. He then addresses the students, saying that Shin is not the only one who can use his magic, ensuring that if they learn what is necessary, everyone can achieve it. Merlin concludes by saying that although Shin is not exactly conventional, he is not beyond normal either. Shin mentally thanks his grandfather for his words, and shortly after, when the students leave, Melita also praises Merlin. She says that clearly he learned to make portals for Shin's sake, as every time his grandson uses magic, they categorize his feats as abnormal or extreme. So if Merlin proves that he can use Shin's magic, they will stop seeing what he does as a special case, and Shin will feel less alone. Sometime later, the prototype of the weapon that Shin asked the blacksmith for is finally ready. It's a detachable sword that can change its blade in case it breaks. Leaving the forge, August says he plans to suggest that the army also adopt those swords. This is because the war against the Blusvia Empire may be near. Apparently, there is massive preparation for war in the Empire. Thor then says that if a prolonged war breaks out, the students may also be recruited. Still, August tells them not to get nervous as nothing has started yet, and he tells Shin not to worry about anything as he definitely won't be dragged into war, as it would be considered military appropriation. However, Shin says with a serious tone that even if he is not recruited for war, he will not hesitate to go to the battlefield if his friends are in danger. Meanwhile, upon hearing that the Imperial army is starting to advance towards their kingdom, Dicium orders all his troops to mobilize. Shortly after, the Emperor of the Blusvia Empire, Harold von Blusvia, gets angry to learn that enemy troops are waiting for them at the border, because he had been informed that the kingdom was occupied with a massive appearance of demons and was not in a position to send any troops. One of his servants informs him that they suffer heavy losses in an ambush, but the Emperor ignores that and asks for Zest, the person who had given him the wrong information about the kingdom. When they tell him that he disappeared since the previous night, the Emperor gets angry, realizing that he was set up. However, his anger is interrupted by a soldier who reports that demons are appearing in masses in the capital. This terrifies the Emperor, who thought there were few demons in the Empire. Therefore, he orders his troops to return to the capital immediately to eliminate the demons. Meanwhile, at the Earlshide Kingdom's base camp, they are puzzled to hear that the Imperial forces have begun to retreat. But before they can decide what to do, a soldier appears, reporting that while they were facing the Imperial army, their outpost was attacked by demons. Amidst the chaos caused by the demons, Oliver Schron walks alongside Miria, a human-turned-demonoid, who has been caring for him for some time. They both discuss the situation, and Strum suggests it would be a good idea to welcome the Imperial army when it arrives. Days later, the demons devastate the capital of the Blusvia Empire, so the Emperor runs around trying to resolve the situation. However, to his surprise, Shrum waits for him in his throne room, and the Emperor is terrified to recognize him. Shrum locks him in the room and tells him that no matter what happened, he wanted to make sure to kill him personally. In no time, he immobilizes the Emperor and casts a powerful spell that ends his life. 3 days later, an exploration team from the Earlshide Kingdom investigates the ruins of the Blusvia Empire, but they encounter Shutram, who thanks them for reducing the numbers of the Imperial army. Seconds later, a group of civilians turned demonoids surround them, catching them by surprise. Some days later, at Earlshide Castle, the team that inevitably retreated in the face of the demonoid threat reports the situation to the king. Meanwhile, At the academy, they decide to increase their fighting strength against the threat of Shrum. So they will have a joint training with the Knights Academy to ensure good coordination between knights and mages. Although mages and knights have never gotten along, the students manage to complete the training, where both sides learn how important teamwork is when defeating demons after many stumbles and misunderstandings. After finishing the training, August announces that all those belonging to the Supreme Magic Study Group, apart from Shin, will be placed under national supervision after graduation. Also, they will likely be in a special unit under his direct control, which will attract the attention of other lands. Feeling a bit disheartened, Shin apologizes to his classmates, saying that he changed the course of their lives, but they encourage him, saying they are happy that their futures are secured. Furthermore, if they use their skills well, they could even be the world's hope, so they ask Shin to keep teaching them. Therefore, Shin dedicates himself to training them over the next few days in the desert he uses as a training ground. August meets with the team and informs them that according to reports, the demonoids are causing disturbances in the Empire. And besides the disastrous damages to towns and villages, they have also killed every member of the nobility and most of the commoners. August explains that since they are demonoids, they cannot simply intervene. He also reveals that the number of demonoids is increasing more and more, so they must be converting civilians into demonoids somehow. Facing the great threat, Shin proposes a training camp so they can strengthen during the summer vacation. They decide to stay on Sicily's family lands under the supervision of Shin's grandparents. Since Sicily's family owns hot springs, everyone spends their first day relaxing before starting the tough training the next day. After several days of being trained by Shin, Merlin, and Melita, the students show remarkable progress. So Shin says he also needs to get stronger and informs them that he has a new spell in mind. His friends, very aware of Shin's exaggerated amount of power, get scared and take refuge behind magical shields to watch his new spell. Shin clarifies that it's not something dangerous, but still, his companions watch him carefully from a distance. Faced with his friend's distrust, Shin decides to start the spell, visualizing what he needs. In a few seconds, Shin launches a concentrated attack that destroys kilometers of the desert they use for training. Melita scolds him for going overboard again, so Shin just excuses himself, saying he didn't anticipate it would be so powerful. After such a flashy demonstration, everyone decides to return to the manor house, but August asks Shin to open a portal to the castle to check on the demonoid situation. But as soon as they arrive at the castle, August meets his fiancée, Elizabeth von Koril, who courteously introduces herself to Shin. But then she scolds August for going camping, leaving her sister May and her behind. August tries to explain that it's not a fun camping trip and that it could even be dangerous. Still, the pair of girls manage to get permission from the king, so the four of them return together to Sicily's family lands. Upon arrival, August warns Elizabeth that they will be in a serious magic training camp, so she can't afford any distractions. Elizabeth says she won't get in their way as she just needs to make sure August is free of pests. Shin says it makes sense since there are many girls in the camp, but Elizabeth interrupts him and tells him that she's more concerned about him. This confuses Shin a lot, so she explains that August always talks about him. However, August tells her that he's just happy to have a friend he can feel at home with, without worrying about his role as a prince. Elizabeth gets even angrier, accusing him of not feeling comfortable with her then. But August tells her that he feels at peace with her, which moves Elizabeth. He also clarifies that Shin already has a girlfriend. Seeing Shin's surprise, August tells him not to play dumb, and that now is a good opportunity to clear things up. After encouraging him, the four return to Cicily's house, where they introduce the two girls. That same night, Shin thinks about what August told him, so he meets with Cicely and finally confesses his feelings for her. Feeling she reciprocates happily, so from that moment on, they establish their relationship as boyfriend and girlfriend. Just the next day, they decide to announce their relationship to Cicily's parents, who happily accept Shin. However, Cicily's mother clarifies that the daughter of a viscount shouldn't be allowed to date someone without being engaged. So Shin has to be willing to take that step if he wants to be with Cicely. Still, the mother relaxes when she sees Shin's determined expression, who confirms to her that he's ready for it, surprising Cicely. Cicily's parents then congratulate them, giving their full approval to their engagement. Days go by, and everyone continues to give their best effort with their training at the camp. After Shin announces that he will attempt a new spell, all his friends cover themselves again with magical shields. But Shin assures them that it's not an attack spell, so everyone approaches him. After a few seconds of concentration, Shin manages to make a rock float in his hand, surprising all his friends. But after using that magic on himself, he leaves everyone even more shocked when he starts floating in the air. The training continues, and after Shin enchants some special uniforms, everyone heads out to hunt catastrophe-class demons, where they master their combat skills, defeating each demon more easily each time. Sometime after finishing the training, Shin and Cicely celebrate their engagement party, where the king toasts to them and their future. After the party ends, Shin properly proposes to her even though the party is already over. Cicely happily accepts the ring Shin offers her, ending the beautiful moment with a kiss. In no time, the study group learns to fly thanks to Shin applying floating magic on them. Meanwhile, in the Imperial Castle, Shrib receives the news that the last village has fallen. which means that every city and town in the Empire's territory has been wiped out. Therefore, Shroom speaks to his army of demonoids, declaring that they have successfully brought the Empire to ruin. However, he says that since the Empire was their goal, he has nothing left to do. So he tells them that they are free to pursue whatever ambitions they have, and they can leave if they want. After many demonoids leave the castle, Miria asks Shroom why he hates the Empire so much, since she heard that he was once an Imperial Duke and even in line to be Emperor. Shroom decides to tell her the story and confesses that everything happened 2 years ago, when he was still known as Olivera von Stratius, a young noble who cared for the commoners and treated them favorably, seeking a country where slavery systems did not exist. A young man with many ideas in mind for a better future, and with a wife expecting a baby. Oliver tells that despite seeking the best for everyone, many nobles didn't like his idea. So they deceived and betrayed him, managing to turn the people against him. They falsely accused him of atrocious acts he never committed, and one day when he returned home, he was set on fire, leaving his wife's lifeless body there. Seeing such a scene, Shroom completely lost control, becoming a demonoid and generating a huge explosion that destroyed almost an entire village, thus swearing revenge against the Blusvia Empire, wanting to destroy everything from the Emperor, the nobility, to the commoners, and absolutely everything. After hearing the story, Zest talks to Lawrence, telling him that Shroom now needs a new target, so he orders him to mingle with those demonoids who left and make them launch an attack on the Swede kingdom. Since it's a small town bordering the Earlshire kingdom, he's very sure that Shin Wolford will show up. In no time, an important ceremony in the Earlshire kingdom is interrupted by a soldier, who urgently exclaims that a large number of demonoids have appeared in the Swede kingdom and have engaged in combat. Because such a message alarms the population attending the ceremony, Amos speaks authoritatively, saying they will handle the situation, as they already have a group prepared to face those demonoids. He presents Shin as the hero who already defeated a demonoid, and has him say a few words to the people as well. After cheering and calming the population, Amos says it's a good idea to leave in a flashy way, so Shin uses floating magic on everyone. And in a spectacular show that surprises the people, the team leaves the place flying. In no time, they manage to reach Swede, where everyone focuses on protecting civilians from the demonoids while Sicily takes care of the wounded. Amos takes charge of announcing their arrival to the kingdom, saying they can rest assured as they have enough forces to protect them. This manages to relieve the civilians and provoke the demonoids listening. The students quickly eliminate demonoids, splitting into pairs and saving every civilian or soldier from the kingdom they see in trouble. Seeing Shin Wolford fight, Lawrence stays in his hiding spot, paralyzed at the sight of so much power. He remembers Shroom's words, who after his fight with Shin arrived very injured and admitted that Shin caused him a lot of pain. Lawrence thinks of a way to find the boy's weakness but doubts he even has one. After a while, the king of Swede, who has been watching everything, says the battle is coming to an end. So Merlin and Melita, who also oversee the battle, say that after all it won't be necessary for them to intervene. Lawrence worries seeing that Shin Wolford isn't the only one decimating the demonoids. Zest, waiting on the outskirts of the kingdom, says he didn't expect something like this to happen, since he was only supposed to measure Shin Wolford's strength, but his power exceeds any scale. Therefore, he asks Miria to take care of the situation. In no time, Miria enters the battlefield, destroying everything in her path. So Lin Hughes and Alice Corner try to stop her, but they cannot stand up to her unmatched strength. Meanwhile, Shin takes care of the demonoids, trying to flee after Lawrence issues a retreat order. But as soon as he sees large explosions in the distance, he drops everything he's doing and goes to investigate. Upon arrival, he sees that his team has been severely battered by Miria's magic. So he asks Stuart Carlton to take care of his teammates while he faces the demonoid. Miria decides to face Shin alone to see how good he is, so they both begin their fight. But soon, Miria is surprised to see how fast Shin is, catching her off guard several times. The rest of his team arrives to support Shin, so Miria says it's time to leave. Seeing Miria's smile, Shin shouts to his team to flee, but in a fraction of a second, Miria rushes towards Maria at high speed, grabbing the girl's head and slamming it against the ground. Shin tries to intervene, but is blocked by a spell from Lawrence, who tells Miria to use explosive magic on them. Miria quickly focuses her magic to release a huge explosion, so Shin shouts to August to protect everyone before the impact. Miria releases that huge explosion, and Shin uses a large magical shield as a spring to send it back into the sky. However, when everything settles, he realizes that both demonoids have disappeared. Still, he's relieved to see that his team is okay and apologizes for letting the demonoids escape. After Miria and Lawrence successfully escape, she explains that Zest sent her alone to create an opportunity for them to escape since they couldn't confront Shin. Shroom watches everything from a distance, clearly entertained by the events but disappointed by the outcome. He says that since he defeated the Empire, things have become boring, but with Shin Wolford nearby, maybe he can forget that. When everything ends, the team of students presents themselves to the King of Swede in his castle. After reporting the events, August expresses his interest in forming an alliance between their nations to prepare a united front. The king understands that this is too heavy a matter to be borne by a single nation, so he tells the prince that they will discuss it. After leaving the castle, Shin tells August that there's something he regrets, and it's that if they had arrived through a portal, there probably wouldn't have been so many deaths. Maria says it's not his fault since he can only open portals to places he has already been. Shin says that's precisely why he has a request. August understands immediately and says he would like to do that too. So both decide to protect the world together with the help of their team. Back at the Earlshide Castle, August asks his father to entrust him to be his negotiator with other nations as the Prince of Earlshide. After Dizem agrees to his request, Shin goes to his grandparents, but Merlin tells him they already understand that he must also go on that journey. So Shin and his team, the Ultimate Magicians, are finally ready to embark on a long journey around the world. Meanwhile, Shrum scolds the 3 Demonoids who didn't listen to him even after he himself told them it would be best to leave Shin Wolford alone. Zest apologizes for his actions, but Strickram says he actually enjoyed it and in fact he would have liked them to be stronger. The 3 Demonoids cower before Shrim's dangerous gaze, which easily makes them tremble. Before leaving the room, Shrim asks Miria how the other matter is going. Miria gets nervous and while touching her belly, says that nothing is definitive yet and that she thinks they need more checks. Shrum finally leaves the room, telling her that he will be waiting for her next report. Zest says nothing and just thinks about the fact that his future depends on that result. Back at the castle, the Ultimate Magicians say goodbye to everyone in the castle, so they finally leave Earlshide. On a mission to form alliances with other nations, explore as many places as they can, and thus protect the world together. If you've reached this part of the video, comment the word Majesty in the comments. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss the next part of this anime.